Just a couple of interesting quotes that I wanted to start with for people who have spoken publicly about Energy East so far. Hopefully by the end of this evening we'll have proven that the direction that they want to go is not the right direction for us, and you'll appreciate that the very serious risks this project presents is not worth it for our communities. So here's a map of the proposed 4,400 kilometer pipeline that would transport crude from Alberta to St. John, New Brunswick. And it would be a multi-use pipeline carrying Bakken fracked oil, what exploded in Lac-Mégantic, as well as conventional oil and increasingly diluted bitumen from the tar sands, which you'll hear more about later from Maude. We know it would be increasingly to carry more diluted bitumen because industry is planning a threefold expansion in the tar sands, which already produces about 2 million barrels of oil per day. This plan also includes a conversion in part for up to 40-year-old natural gas pipeline. So rightly raising people's concerns about pipeline safety, access to natural gas, and home heating costs as well. So this pipeline would be the longest and one of the largest oil pipelines in North America, transporting 1.1 million barrels of crude oil every day. It is double the capacity of the controversial Northern Gateway pipeline, facing a wall of opposition out west. And TransCanada's own Keystone XL pipeline, which we'll hear more about later, is 830 million barrels per day. The sheer capacity this pipeline means if there was a spill, and that's not, pardon me, not if, that's when there is a spill, it threatens to be the largest pipeline spill Canada has ever seen. It could spill up to 1 million liters of oil in a 10-minute period. In contrast with the rhetoric being used to sell this pipeline, it is indeed another export project as well. So a report that we worked on, released recently with others, finds that 1 million of the 1.1 million transported every day is expected to be exported unrefined. So this table indicates the capacity of the 3 refineries along the pipeline's path. You can see that it totals 672,000 barrels per day, a far cry from the up to 1.1 million barrels per day the pipeline would transport. And this slide demonstrates the projected crude oil supply for these 3 refineries, totaling 550,000. Based on this evidence, this report concludes that 700,000 to 1 million barrels per day will be destined for export unrefined. So a far cry from the nation-building project that is being promised. It will not be a significant source of supply for Atlantic Canadians, and it won't reduce costs at the gas pump. In other words, there is little reward for us here in Atlantic Canada. Will it generate jobs? Yes, but these will be primarily short-term construction jobs. Their own numbers indicate 1,087 direct long-term jobs over 40 years across the country. Efficiency Nova Scotia, an energy efficiency utility, has reduced climate pollution while generating 1,200 direct long-term jobs in the past 4 years in Nova Scotia alone, just to draw a comparison. As well, TransCanada has a poor track record on job promises. While TransCanada has talked of generating 20,000 jobs for their Keystone XL pipeline, President Obama talks of 50 to 100 long-term jobs. So there's a big discrepancy there. Building the Energy East pipeline will not stop dangerous oil shipments from traveling through communities by rail either. This new project will only add to the risks from oil being shipped through communities across Canada. We all witnessed what happened in Lac-Mégantic. It was a tragedy that must not be repeated. No community should have to deal with so-called bomb trains running through them. Industry has been abundantly clear that they want all available channels to transport crude in order to expand production. This includes oil and rail projects. Oil by rail traffic has seen a huge rise in recent years, and this is primarily from Bakken shale oil from the United States. The US has a law against exports from oil to any country but Canada. So what is happening now through the increase of Bakken oil to Canada and through Canada to international markets, there is more than enough for rail and pipeline. And this Bakken shale oil production booms and busts quickly. Regardless of west to east pipeline capacity, rail will continue to grow as a method of transporting this Bakken crude because of its advantages of a distributed, flexible, and fast option. So this is a dangerous situation indeed. Oil by rail absolutely does need to be addressed by pulling dangerous rail cars off the rails, combined with stronger regulations to protect communities and a plan to transition to sustainable alternatives. So there are also implications for coastal waters. TransCanada is proposing to build 2 new marine terminals. And I know we'll hear a lot more from Matt about the St. John terminal. But just to say that the first terminal will be in Gros-Cacuna, which is in Quebec, and that will be able to support tankers carrying up to 1.1 million barrels of oil down the St. Lawrence River to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And then the second will be the deep sea marine terminal, jointly built with Irving Oil Limited in St. John, New Brunswick, with the capacity to house tankers transporting up to 2.2 million barrels of crude per day. Energy East would see a close to doubling of tanker traffic on the Bay of Fundy. To this, I want to add as well that while tanker spills are becoming less frequent, a significant increase in tanker traffic, as we're proposing here, increases the risks of a serious spill. And of course, a serious spill would be devastating. 25 years ago, an oil tanker by the name of Exxon Valdez slammed into the Bligh Reef, spilling 11 million gallons of oil on Alaska's Prince William Sound. The coastal ecosystem has been permanently damaged, with thousands of gallons of oil polluting the beaches and still hurting the ecosystem near the shore. So who would pay for this type of cleanup? In Canada, tanker companies are supposed to be responsible, but there's one hitch to that plan. The maximum amount of money available to them to deal with a worst-case scenario is approximately 1.33 billion Canadian dollars. So the Exxon Valdez spill cost at least 3.5 billion, not including losses from associated industries like sport fishing and tourism. So this increases or creates a financial risk as well for the Atlantic region. And this cleanup will never actually bring the waters back to what they once were either. Industry actually considers an oil spill clean if the marine environment, if they recover 10 to 15% of the oil in a marine environment. In relation to climate change, this pipeline will ship more and more tar sands crude. This is where growth is projected. So industry has its sights on tripling production of tar sands, already the fastest growing source of climate pollution in this country, and already having serious downstream impacts as well for the downstream communities in Alberta. We know that we need to change course when it comes to climate change, and Atlantic Canada is on the front lines of these changes. New infrastructure, such as the new build that would be happening in New Brunswick for the pipeline, would lock us into further expansion as opposed to moving us in the direction of alternatives, which is what we want. Filling this pipeline along would leave an up to 40% expansion in the tar sands, which is 2 to 5 times more climate polluting to produce than conventional oil. And it would also mean more climate pollution than any single Atlantic province. Even the International Energy Agency, not Greenpeace, in fact, recognize that 2/3 of oil needs to stay in the ground if we are to avoid the worst of climate change. So for us, for my children and yours, for 7 generations to come, we need to change course. The good news is that the Atlantic region doesn't actually need this pipeline. As I've demonstrated, and you will hear from others, there is little benefit to us here. There are alternatives, however. There are examples within Canada. In fact, the document you may have seen on the table outside highlights both examples of leadership already emerging in Atlantic Canada towards a sustainable Atlantic energy vision, as well as 5 steps with concrete goals that can be taken towards this future. And further good news, the transition to sustainable energy will actually generate more jobs than investing in oil and gas development. In fact, quite a bit more. Where mass transit is a priority, where it is accessible and affordable, it generates good jobs. Renewable jobs, if put in the hands of the people and through municipal ownership, farmers, including owning solar panels and wind turbines, people joining in cooperatives, we can lower the climate pollution and people can directly own and benefit from these projects. So I'm not sure what we're waiting for. TransCanada calls itself a leader on pipeline safety as well. The reality is, it's not if the pipeline spills, it's when and how much. The sheer volume of this massive pipeline, as I mentioned, 1.1 million barrels per day, means that when it spills, it threatens to be the largest pipeline spill that Canada has ever seen. And the pipeline crosses some of Canada's most important waterways all along this route, something that we have chronicled in a recent report. It traverses drinking water sources, fishing waters, recreational waters, and sensitive marine environments. In New Brunswick, it crosses tributaries that quickly flow into the St. John River. It also crosses 2 tributaries that lead into Grand Lake, where we were today in Chipman area. In relation to pipeline safety, TransCanada has already seen 5 catastrophic pipeline incidents in North America this year alone, 3 in Canada. In our pipeline safety briefing, we took a look at the pipeline incident reports for their natural gas mainland system, one of the pipelines slated for conversion to carry gas for Energy East. There were 8 ruptures on this system of pipelines between 1991 and 2011. What we discovered for this report was very startling. The flow of natural gas was cut off in some cases as quickly as 10 minutes. In others, it wasn't fully cut off for 10 hours. In one case, one pipeline rupture led to another fire on a nearby natural gas pipeline. And in all cases except for one, maybe 2 depending on how you read the details, it was people who discovered the incidents, not computer monitoring, a police officer, TransCanada staff, a passerby. And in relation to TransCanada's safety record, Evan Vokes, a former pipeline materials engineer with TransCanada, became a whistleblower after documenting a culture of non-compliance within TransCanada's corporation. Vokes' job was to ensure TransCanada complied with pipeline regulation. He visited multiple projects and observed failures including faulty welds, defective parts, and rushed preparation for pipeline installations. He brought this information forward to his manager and eventually to CEO Russ Girling himself. He was eventually fired from TransCanada. Vokes sent damning evidence of code violations to the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of Alberta, to the Canadian National Energy Board, and to the U.S. Department of Transportation, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. And while TransCanada has tried to dismiss these concerns, Vokes was recently vindicated. It was in the last NEB, National Energy Board, audit of their key safety systems, TransCanada was found to be non-compliant in 4 out of 9 categories.
So thank you all so much for coming. It's great to see a good crowd. Thank you, Angela, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from my co-presenters as well. I'll get right on to it. As Angela said, this is an export project, and it's heading, the vehicle for export is going to be oil tankers. So we're going to see 2 significant marine terminals built in Cacouna, Quebec, and in St. John, New Brunswick. As Maggie mentioned, I live and work on the Bay of Fundy. It's the body of water I work on and that I love, but everything I say about the Bay of Fundy also will apply to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So it's important to keep that in mind when I talk about impact on fisheries, when I talk about impact on tourism, on whale watching, when I talk about impact on whales, lobsters, other critters. The impacts would be very similar in both ecosystems. So I'll be talking about the Bay of Fundy, but the concerns also apply to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And this image you're seeing there, that's a tanker in at the Canaport facility in St. John. It's adjacent to that jetty, that LNG jetty that they plan to build a jetty to. Right now their plan is for to be able to bring tankers in at a jetty just adjacent to that one. So you'll see more pictures of that area from the water in a few minutes. So if you could go to the next slide, Jean-Louis. Thank you. So the Bay of Fundy is a special place. I hope we're a little bit inland here, but I'm sure most of you have spent some time on the shores of the Bay of Fundy, have enjoyed and appreciated our big tides. These are some aerial photographs of where I live. The one on top is Campobello Island, and behind it you see Eastport, Maine. You see the white point at the bottom of that top picture is the Head Harbour Lighthouse, one of the most photographed lighthouses in Atlantic Canada. And then below we see just the shoreline, Letite shoreline, and we can, I don't know if you can see it, but you can see the ferry coming in from Deer Island. So this is a very special part of the world in the Outer Bay of Fundy. Oil from spills in St. John have hit these islands in the past. And I'll talk more about that later, but we have, if you'll move to the next slide. I always like to show people this at the beginning of a discussion when we're talking about any of the issues facing the Bay of Fundy, because this really gets across to us how our dramatic tidal ecosystem works. So you can see the darker blue areas are deeper water. So you see that deep channel where we have the cool, rich waters coming in from the North Atlantic, flooding into the Gulf of Maine, which is that big bowl, and then it basically, with every tide, gets forced up into the Bay of Fundy, which is funnel-shaped. And sort of just at the mouth of the Bay of Fundy, you see Grand Manan and other islands, and as the tidal waters run in and out, they hit these island ecosystems, and they hit the mountains and valleys on the sea bottom. And we have nutrients mixing, we have nutrients and food mixing all through the water column. We have whales coming into the Bay of Fundy to feed. We have a host of other things coming in, and that's because we live in a special place. And we produce a lot of food. The Bay of Fundy, we don't do anything. The Bay of Fundy produces a lot of food for a lot of animals, including ourselves. It is a special place, and the kinds of increases in tanker traffic we expect to see with this pipeline should cause us great concern. So let's move on to the next slide. That's great. Before we talk about the Energy East pipeline, the terminal, and increases in tanker traffic, it's important to realize that the Bay of Fundy is already industrialized. We have a big refinery here. We have oil tankers moving in and out. We have LNG tankers moving in and out. And so we've already had some experience that should give us pause and that will suggest what we might experience should we go further down this road of industrializing our bay. The picture you see there was taken just this year, and it's of a lobster fishing boat in the spring fishery of this year, fishing alongside a terminal at the Monobui in St. John. And so we have fishing, well, you'll hear more about this later, but fishing boats in the Bay of Fundy are fishing right alongside oil tankers, and any increases will enhance the impacts the fishery feels. But first, it's important I think one of the critical things is to look at what's happened in the past and see what that will tell us about in the future. So I started by looking into historic oil spills, and I found a few that I think would be very instructive. In 1974, there was a fairly significant oil spill. They mostly happen while tankers are loading or unloading in St. John. This spill in 1974 headed straight for the Deer Island area. It was a very significant spill. It hit shore in Deer Island, and it took a long time to clean up. So that's the area I showed you from the air before. And so we know that oil can track that way, and we know that it can track fast. And we also know from that spill that if there's fresh water coming out of the St. John River or other systems, it can slip in between the fresh and salt water, so it can even move undetected. We can't always see it on the top of the water. So that's something we learned from the 1974 spill. In 1979, the spill went in a similar direction, not quite as far. It went towards New River Beach. Has anyone enjoyed New River Beach Provincial Park? It's headed right there, and it actually hit a herring weir. So herring weirs are large traps designed to catch herring, a very important fishery that is struggling but still very important in the Bay of Fundy. And it hit a herring weir, and it took out a lot of fish. Over 1,000 tons of herring were being held in that weir, and it was valued at almost $130,000 that fisherman lost that day when oil hit his weir. And it took years. He did get some compensation, but it took years and years and years, and the compensation program wouldn't be any better today than it was then. So once the people who take the hit don't necessarily get any help very quickly. There was another spill in 1989. What I think one of the important things about this spill, and what we see in most of the spills, is that it was estimated at being a few liters, and then a little later it turned out to be more like 480 barrels. So quite a bit more than a few liters, and that spill happened in fog, which is also something we've seen a lot of. And then in 1994, another spill reported as 1 or 2 barrels. Later, there were 2 estimates from the air that it was either between 17 or 34 tons, so it's reported as 2 barrels. Later, we find out we're looking at approaching 35 tons of oil. It floated in the bay for 3 weeks, then made landfall up the coast from Digby, and shore cleanup was delayed by several weeks by weather, and even finding the oil was delayed by weather. So I think that's very instructive. We can't count on oil spilling on a nice day. And anyone who runs a boat or who's even taken the ferry to Grand Manan knows that you can't count on the Bay of Fundy to be calm and without fog. And then as recently as 2007, there was another spill that was quite simply lost in the fog. We don't know where it went. We don't know how long it was in the water column. We don't know. We just don't know anything about it because we couldn't find it. And I think that's quite instructive as well. And there's no reason to expect that a spill in the future wouldn't face the same concerns. But a spill associated with the Energy's pipeline would have, and the tankers associated with it would have some even added risks with it. Could you go to the next slide? Thank you. So, Energy East in the Bay of Fundy. For the next few minutes, I'll talk about bitumen. We heard from Angela that bitumen from the Alberta tar sands will be a lot of the product in this pipeline. Bitumen, and I'll talk about some of the concerns with bitumen in saltwater and in freshwater. We'll talk about impacts on the fishery, and we'll talk about impacts on wildlife. Next slide, please. This is my only boring slide, I promise. Fortunately, we don't have a picture of a bitumen spill in the Bay of Fundy, so I'm glad not to have a picture for this slide. There haven't been actually significant spills of bitumen in seawater yet, but we know from spills in saltwater, in freshwater, that it doesn't behave like conventional oil. I think we'll hear more about the Kalamazoo spill later, but in freshwater it can sink and behave in ways that makes it even harder to clean up than conventional oil. And certainly in marine waters where we haven't had a major spill, the good research, independent research that's been done, most recently by Environment Canada, finds that in conditions like the Bay of Fundy, we would expect bitumen to sink and form tar balls. So anyone that puts traps down to catch lobster or scallops or anything else is going to be very concerned about oil that might sink. And should a spill occur of bitumen or conventional oil, we expect that dispersants would be used. And I know on an earlier leg of this tour we had someone from the Gulf of Mexico who spoke very passionately about the effects that dispersant use has had on the people around the Gulf of Mexico and on the ecosystem. So I won't go into dispersants tonight, but certainly if there are any questions afterwards, it's a whole other area of concern. Next slide, please. There are a lot of people employed fishing in the Bay of Fundy and, of course, in the Gulf of Maine, too. I'm going to give you the example of Deer Island as one case study, but every village, every fishing village, every little island, it would be very similar. So up in the top corner there, you see my friend Dale Mitchell. He's with his grandson at their herring weir, and he lives on Deer Island, New Brunswick. We didn't quite see Deer Island in the aerial photos I showed you, but Deer Island just has 700 people on it. There are 33 fishing licenses, and each of those boats employs 3 or 4 people. Dale fishes with his own family members, with his son, his daughter-in-law, his son-in-law, and that's the case with pretty much every lobster boat, every scallop boat you see in the Bay of Fundy is a family business. These aren't big corporations. These are individual businesses that work really hard. I can't imagine working as hard. I see when boats go out on the second Tuesday in November, I like to be home cozy in my bed, not braving the Bay of Fundy. So this is hard work, but we have these fisheries really are the lifeblood of our coastal communities. And yes, we're being promised a couple jobs at a marine terminal, but it's these fisheries have sustained our coastal communities for a long time, and they will continue to do so. And the money that's earned by these fisheries stay in the local communities. It's owned by local people. It's not owned by corporations that put the money somewhere else. So, and as I mentioned earlier, these fisheries go after bottom-dwelling species, lobsters, scallops, sea urchins, sea cucumbers, and so when they hear about oil that sinks, i.e. bitumen, that adds a whole other level of concern. So I have lots I could say. In the interest of time, I'll move along, though. I'm probably going a little long. Great. So I wanted to show you the shipping lane. So this is the route tankers currently take in and out of the Bay of Fundy. The dark blue dots with the box around them is the endangered right whale breeding area. To their credit, Irving and other players actually moved the fishing lanes so that they weren't running through the middle of that key right whale breeding area. But the right whales still have to cross that shipping lane coming in and out of the Bay of Fundy, and the right whales go where the food are. So they may well move into the shipping lane at some point. As you can see, they're still very close, and this is our most endangered whale. Every individual matters. So if one individual dies, there's much less likelihood of that species surviving. And so the other thing that's important to notice with the route is that while people fishing around St. John and around Grand Manan are likely to be fishing near the shipping lane, there's also significant impact on fisheries from Nova Scotia as well. You see that it cuts over quite close to Nova Scotia. So those fisheries aren't being consulted, right? Because this is perceived as a New Brunswick issue. But from the fisheries perspective, this issue runs well beyond New Brunswick's borders. And so, so we could move to the next slide. Great. So Fundy wildlife. This is near and dear to me, and I know it's also near and dear to, of course, the fishery and to the really important tourism industry, the whale watching industry that we have in the outer Bay of Fundy on both sides of the bay. We rely on some of the species like lobster you see in the corner to catch and cook and sell, but we also rely on the whales and the birds for our ecotourism industries. So impacts on these wildlife potential impacts are quite alarming. And our minds often turn to the risk of spills, and of course a spill would be devastating to seals, porpoise, the various kinds of whales we have, and any seabirds that would come into contact with it. But even without a spill, we would expect some pretty significant impacts. Just based on raw numbers of product we expect to be moved in the Bay of Fundy, this pipeline could represent up to a doubling of shipping traffic in the bay, so we have several risks associated with that. There's greater risk for direct whale strikes of ships hitting whales. There'll be more whales moving, more ships, and they move quite quickly, and the whales don't have time to get out of their way. And so that's a real risk, and as we saw, they're not running through whale habitat in the same way they used to, but the whales move around, and they have to move in and out of the shipping lane. And if the shipping lane's more clogged, there's more risk there. But a really significant risk people aren't often aware of is noise. The noise created by tankers is extremely disruptive to whales. It's the same low frequency of noise the large whales use to communicate with each other. And in some heavily industrialized areas, with similar tanker traffic that we would expect in the Bay of Fundy should the pipeline go through, the capacity of whales to communicate can be reduced by 80%. So the distance at which they can communicate with each other can be reduced by 80%. And that is hugely significant. It makes it harder for them to find each other, harder for them to find a mate, harder for them to communicate about where the good food is. It's really significant. And the noise just causes stress. It would be like, imagine your smoke alarm always going off, right? It's a noise. It's a frequency of noise that really distresses them. On that note, I'll move to my second last slide. I don't want to finish this talk without talking about the impacts of climate change as well. The National Energy Board, who will be holding hearings and making recommendations on whether this pipeline shall be approved, doesn't want to hear about climate change, doesn't want to discuss it, but the expansion of the tar sands and the resulting increase in greenhouse gas emissions and further exacerbation of climate change will have really significant impacts, and it has to be part of the discussion. In the ocean, temperature change and ocean acidification, actually from climate change, the ocean does get more acidic as well as getting warmer. We can see sensitive ecosystems like those we have in the Bay of Fundy simply break down, and all the economic activities that rely on them. But we also, I have pictures up of Hurricane Arthur. I have a picture of a tree landing on the Pansy Patch Bed and Breakfast in my hometown of St. Andrews. Luckily it didn't go through the roof, but it was close to it. And that we all remember Arthur, and many of us were without power for a long time. And then the picture at the bottom, while beautiful, is of the ice storm last Christmas, which also saw us, a lot of us without power. And so the extreme weather events are certainly a concern for us, but there are a host of impacts from climate change which will affect our natural ecosystems and our economic activities that rely on them. And last slide, and with that, I'm all done.
Well, thank you, and I just want to say thank you to the organizers of this tour, the Council of Canadians and the Conservation Council of New Brunswick, and thank you to all of you for being here. If we could have gotten this many people to come to some of our initial meetings on the Keystone XL pipeline, it would have been stopped 4 years ago. I want to just start with, I raise cattle, I raise grass-fed beef, but what brings me to this issue is something that my father told me, two things that my father told me a lot as I was growing up. He always told me, you know, Ben, you don't have to become a rancher like me, you don't have to do what I do, but if you do, don't ever forget that what you're doing is producing food for people. Let that guide every decision that you make. And he also said, you cannot live in this place without water. And so those two things are what guides my, my work with the pipeline. And so, speaking of water, what originally brought me to this issue was the fact that the Keystone XL pipeline was going to run through the, what we call the Ogallala Aquifer, but what's really called the Northern High Plains Aquifer. It provides over 80% of the daily drinking water for the people in 8 states, 85% for the folks in Nebraska. I drink from the Ogallala Aquifer every day, as well as many, many people in Nebraska. It provides 30% of the agricultural irrigation water in the United States. And 30% of the world's fresh water is groundwater, and this is significant because in our lifetimes, you know, in the next few years, we're looking at half of the world's population is going to be seeing water shortages, and that's going to create problems. And so we have to work to protect the water that we have, especially if it's able to be used and if people are able to drink it. Overlying the, well, related to that, just kind of a little specific about Nebraska, there's some stats on there. We're #1 in the United States for irrigated cropland. We're #1 in the U.S. For commercial red meat production. So we produce a significant amount of food for the United States and for the commodity market, which I don't consider myself a commodity producer, but those are just some numbers. So we depend on that water to water our cattle, to irrigate crops, to drink for ourselves and our families and communities. Nebraska's economy, where I come from, you know, we want to talk about jobs. We want to talk about economic benefits of a pipeline. Just for example, if you look at the total gross sales of product, agricultural product in Nebraska, when TransCanada came to us and said we want to build a $7 billion pipeline, and I mean, we have over $20 billion state ag economy. 3 out of 4 jobs in Nebraska is directly related to agriculture. And so any effect on that economy, any effect on any part of that is going to significantly affect our people there. And so the magnitude of what we're already doing, you know, our economic well-being is greatly, I mean, when you compare the two, you know, you got to look at what the actual numbers are. And so this is the state of Nebraska underlined with the Ogallala Aquifer in the blue there, and then the original route of the Keystone XL pipeline going through that. My hometown is Atkinson at top. That's where I went to high school. And where that area of, basically right where that black tag is pointing, there's kind of a circle around that area is what we call the recharge zone of the Ogallala Aquifer. The recharge zone means that snow melt, rainwater, any type of precipitation, there is no separation between the surface water and the groundwater there. The water is at the surface of the soil in many areas. To dig a well, we don't dig a well. We pound a pipe into the ground and the water comes out on its own pressure. Next slide, and that'll illustrate that. Sorry, it'll be later, but the Nebraska sandhills overlie most of the aquifer. As I said, they're the water filter. You know, some people have the water filter pitchers that they have in their fridge. That's what the sandhills are. So why would we pollute that? It's the largest vegetated sand dune area in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, it's a significant. When early settlers and pioneers were coming out to that region, they called it the Great American Desert because it happened to be a drought, because it is sand. It's very susceptible to erosion. It's very susceptible to disturbance. It's very permeable to water and chemicals. The water, this is a well, we call them flowing wells on our ranch. The water system is very connected to groundwater. That is just a pipe stuck in the ground. The water comes out, it flows into these little shallow marshes and then percolates back down into the groundwater. So groundwater and surface water directly connected. Any type of leak or spill under the ground can become surface water, can be transported, can affect a lot of things. That's just an illustration of, that's me drinking out of the well. I always do that anytime I visit the home ranch. Go ahead. The sandhills, this is just an illustration. This is an area where our public power district leveled an area to make a substation for a pipeline pump station. This was all before TransCanada had a permit to build the pipeline. That just shows you, that's what sand does when you disturb it and it blows. Go to the next slide, please. There on the bottom is a state highway. Next slide. And then there to the left is the town nearby. So it's a very significant scar on the land. They didn't end up doing anything with that because they rerouted the pipeline because we stopped it, and now that's just there. My brother used to live there where that sand is at, so I got to see it up close, and he had to deal with that. Go ahead. When it comes to why stop the pipeline, why do the promises of jobs and why do the risks to our water ring kind of hollow for us there? We have enormous potential for other alternatives that we can do in our own communities that will build long-term environmental sustainability and energy security in our communities, things that we already have at our disposal, like wind energy. Nebraska has the third highest wind energy potential in the states. We're about 26th in what we've actually done. In solar, it's a similar story. We're very much below the average of what other states in our country are doing, and same in efficiency. So we have much potential in our state. We don't need a few temporary construction jobs that will be gone in a couple of months that will not invest in our communities. I mean, that's not long-term sustainable investment. When you think about a pipeline being in your community, you know, these easements that they're wanting landowners to sign, think about it in terms of a marriage. I don't know anyone who gets married for the promise of short-term economic benefit. And if you do, I would question you know, I don't know if you'd be a suitable partner for most people. But and that's really what the way I look at this pipeline. And the people in these communities are going to be dealing with this pipeline for 50, 100, 150 years. And so it's not about how much money you're going to make next year. It's not about how big the easement check is going to be, the only easement check that you're ever going to get when you sign away your rights to that property forever. It's about what is going to keep your community sustained into the future, and what legacy are you going to leave to your children who might want to grow food on your land as well. So that's kind of where we come from. In the beginning, it felt very lonely. I felt like I was the only person who was concerned about this issue, because that's what TransCanada was telling me. That's what they were telling landowners. They were saying, you are the only one who's not signing an easement. You're the only one who's not on board with this. You're the only person in your county who's opposed to this. And that was a lie. Can I grab that glass of water, please? Excuse me. This is the first ad, and I say ad. We couldn't get any newspapers to cover the story of the pipeline coming through. We couldn't. All the local media outlets were acting like it was inevitable, like it was a done deal, like it wasn't news. So we actually had to purchase. I had to go around and beg for money to purchase an ad in an independent newspaper. And in return for that, they said, "Well, what are you going to say?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. You know, I had all these things." And Jane Klebb with Bold, Nebraska, who I now work for, I used to, you know, work with her at Bold, Nebraska. She said, "Well, we'll do the ad. We'll help you get some funds to do this, but we have to use, you know, your picture, and you have to give a quote." And so you can't read the quote, but I basically, I don't know if you can see it, but basically at that time was when the BP oil spill happened in the Gulf, and TransCanada was coming into our communities and saying, "You see what happens when you have, you know, when you have these refineries and these wells in the ocean? That's why we need to build this pipeline, because pipelines are safer than that." And then about 6 months later, they had the Kalamazoo Enbridge spill in Michigan. And if any of you have ever seen that and know what that's all about, I've been there. It's very it's very sad what has happened in that community. It's cost almost $1 billion to clean it up. The energy company, Enbridge, basically had to buy the homes along that area and move the people out, and they temporarily housed the cleanup workers there, and now that land is basically condemned. So what did we do about it? Well, that's one of my favorite quotes there. All politics is local. We got a little bit political. We started speaking out, and we started working with our neighbors, and we started having community meetings, and we started participating in the public process. We started putting our own ads out on Facebook. We started putting our own, we hired a design team that would help us design ads, and we used the stories of the people who would be affected by the pipeline. We allowed them to tell their story. We gave them a platform because the media was not listening to us, and we did it ourselves. And that's my friend Jim Tarnick. Jim actually is running for public office this year, so I'm excited to get back and see, because our elections are happening right now. The polls will close in an hour, so I'm interested to see how Jim did. We participated in the State Department public hearings. We had thousands of people that came to those. We kept track. I don't know if TransCanada did or if the State Department did, but over 90% of the people who testified at those were opposed to the pipeline. That had a great impact. We kept the pressure on President Obama. We never let him, we were always sending him letters, always sending him postcards, always trying we were inviting him to Nebraska. As the next slide will indicate, we invited him to a beer and beef summit with beer made from tar sands free water and beef grazed on tar sands free grass. He never took us up on that, but that's okay. There's more for us that way. Go ahead. We didn't stop with our president. We didn't stop with our own country. We very much were aware from the beginning that this was a pipeline that was owned by a foreign corporation, not necessarily Canada. We don't know who the owners of TransCanada are. They're a limited partnership. We don't know who they are. They're nameless, faceless owners with a lot of money coming from somewhere that want to get this oil to other places in the world. It's an export pipeline, the Keystone XL. I call it the Keystone Export Pipeline just because that makes more sense to me. We have to keep the focus on the people who are the decision makers and let them know that people like Megan, my friend Megan Hammond, who has a ranch down in York County, Nebraska, are going to be affected by the decisions that they're making. That's in this Nebraska State Legislature at the Governor's State of the Union address, or State of the State address. You can't take signs into the legislative chamber, but we had some volunteers who got a little creative with their clothing and sent a message. Next slide. We also started a landowners legal defense fund called the Nebraska Easement Action Team, or NEAT. It's a nonprofit organization where landowners can jointly represent each other and themselves as a group, bonding together. We have a legal representation that works pro bono, and anyone can donate to NEAT. It's a tax-deductible donation, so we've gotten a lot of community support, a lot of support from people in our state, from other places, to help the landowners who will be dealing with TransCanada if it comes to having to sign easements, to focus on the terms of those easements. Again, what that easement actually says, what that easement takes from a landowner, and what it gives TransCanada is the most important thing that you need to be thinking about, not the money. The money is there to distract you and to make you not think about what that easement says. But when it comes time to liability, if in the case of a spill, if there's damage, if you're not able to use the property in the way that you thought you were going to be able to use it, what that easement says very much matters at that time. So that's why we started this group, to focus on the easements. That's one of the billboards that we put, because early on TransCanada was coming and telling our landowners that they needed to sign an easement within 30 days or they would condemn the property through eminent domain. Now, you can't condemn a property in our country unless you have a permit to build something. So right away, there wasn't a lot of trust building there, and frankly, it angered quite a few people that they had the audacity to come say that we're going to seize your property if you don't sign in 30 days, because there's a process that we have in place for that kind of thing, and they seem to think that there was none. So we got it out in public that landowners were going to stand up to that type of action. We also built a barn directly in the pipeline route. It's a wind and solar hybrid powered barn. We built that with community volunteer labor. We raised over $70,000 from over 1,000 donors to build this barn in the path of the pipeline. So if the pipeline were to be approved, they would literally have to tear down clean energy to build it. And so we also generate power in this barn. That slide on the bottom shows how much power as of the end of September 2014 that we've generated. We've generated about a little over 3 megawatt hours of electricity just on that one little barn. So we're finding clean energy solutions to things. And then we've also started working with the tribes. We've started what we call the Cowboy Indian Alliance. We work with tribes up in South Dakota, Montana, and down south in Oklahoma. That we have the Ponca tribe has their native ancestral grounds are in Nebraska. They are a tribe that is split into the northern and southern Ponca. They are coming together over this issue, which is a great thing to see. This has given us an opportunity to talk about the alliances that we form between the native tribes, the landowners and the farmers and ranchers, between our conservative Republicans, between the more liberal, the Democrats, people who are independent. We've all kind of come together on this issue because we all drink water and we all eat food, and we all need to live in these places where we were born and raised and where we want to raise our families. And there's no other way to do that unless you work together. The guy, go back one more slide, sorry. The guy on the top left is Art Tandrup. He has been very gracious in donating the use of his property. One of the things that we did on his property was we recreated the world's largest crop art. That circle, that half circle, is a 40-acre irrigated circle pivot. It's 80. The whole square would be 160. And so what we did was we went and flagged out a grid, and we actually disked into the ground that design. It's the world's largest crop art. It's visible from way up high. I don't know if it's visible from space, but and then we planted organic soybeans in there, so they kind of came in a different pattern before the harvest. And up in the top left-hand corner of that square, go to the next slide. That's the flag for one of the flags for the Cowboy Indian Alliance. We used the black snake imagery that was mentioned earlier, and in that little square corner of ground, we harvested the Ponca sacred corn. The Ponca are a people of the corn. The man down on the right, Mikasi is his name, Mikasi. He's the keeper of the corn in his tribe. Back in 1980, his great-grandfather gave him a tin cup with 13 kernels of corn in it, and he said, "This is the last of our traditional corn that we had before we were relocated to Oklahoma from northern Nebraska." And so he, over the years, has developed that seed stock and by planting it in various areas. And Art Tandrup, the man in the slide previous, allowed us to plant that. We planted it by hand, we weeded it by hand, and we harvested it by hand. And it was the first time that the Ponca had planted and harvested their own traditional sacred corn on their own homeland in 137 years. That place has been declared a sacred site for the Ponca, and that crop has been registered in the United States Department of Agriculture as Ponca sacred corn for the first time ever. So that's a pretty good story that we have there. So go ahead. Just some more Cowboy Indian Alliance photos. We've gone to DC. We went to the People's Climate March in New York. We protested by wading into the reflecting pool at the Washington Monument. You can't see the sign there. It says, standing in this water could get us arrested. TransCanada pollutes water and nothing happens. Next slide. We also had a Harvest the Hope concert in Arts Cornfield with a couple of guys, Neil Young and Willie Nelson. It drew about 10,000 people. There were tribal artists there also, so it was a great event that brought a lot of folks from a lot of places, and it was a good time, a lot of good music and good fun. As I said, we're having an election now. We've started our new energy, or we've had our new energy voter campaign. Down there on the right-hand corner, we have one of our House members, Lee Terry, who has been a very vocal proponent of the pipeline. I'm excited to go check my polling results because I don't think he's going to be our House member after tonight. And so we've been involved from every level, from the local level, from the local government level, all the way up to our elections and our presidential elections and our federal elections. And sometimes we get a win. President Obama did deny the first application of the Keystone pipeline, and that's about the closest I ever got to President Obama. So with that, I'll pass it along to the next presenters. I'm looking forward to the questions you have because I'm sure there are some. But again, thank you. I'm very glad to be here. I feel very welcome here, and I'm really excited to see so many faces in this crowd because you have the opportunity to do something very, very momentous, I think, in the history of your country. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Maggie, and thank you all very, very much for being here tonight. This is a fabulous turnout, and we're just thrilled. Big thank you again to Ron for the welcome here to your territory. Big thank you and shout out to Matt for the work you're doing protecting the Bay of Fundy. Angela, you're a treat and a joy to work with at all times. I want to say a big thank you to the Council of Canadians and the Conservation Council tonight for the work that you did putting this together. And just a strong welcome, Ben, to our shores, to you. You are just a breath of fresh air, and we're really thrilled to start this relationship and this alliance. It's going to keep TransCanada Pipelines out of both of our countries. I'm not going to speak for too long because I want to leave us lots of time to talk, and I want to talk a little bit about water, but first of all, I just want to deal with the 3 myths that TransCanada is putting out there, and you've heard some of it tonight, but I think it bears repeating. TransCanada finally filed for their application this past Thursday. But you know, they really have a nerve. They're everywhere across the country. We've been following them all the way from Hardisty, Alberta to, well, even beyond here, but into Nova Scotia. And they are all along the route already retrofitting the pipes where the old pipeline is being retrofitted. They're already working with municipalities saying, well, we'll pay for and we'll help you do the environmental assessment, the emergency assessment. They're coming on to landowner property to do surveys. This is all happening now before the company even has the permit. It's as if they think they have the God-given right to do this, and they're everywhere we go, they've been there. We were in Shipman this morning, and we met with the mayor and the councillors, and one of the councillors said that the company had been there 2 or 3 times already, is what they said. So local communities are only hearing one side of the story, and it's extraordinarily important that we get the other sides out. The first myth that they're talking about, and this is in their recent filing, I just want to make this really clear, is that this is a nation-building issue. This is a nation-building project, and that finally Western oil is going to be used to serve Eastern Canadians. And they say it will replace what they say are 86% of the energy coming into Eastern Canada is coming from overseas places like, sources like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. Well, there's a brand new study out, and we can give you all the background on all of these, that in fact Eastern Canada is only importing about 39% of its energy now, and most of that comes from the United States. So this is not true. It is not going to be you know, a replacement. It's not Western energy coming here. Secondly, they say that it's going to provide energy, you know, it is for Eastern Canadians, and this is not true either. This pipeline is an export pipeline. And when they came out with their statement on this past Thursday, they challenged us, saying it's not an export pipe, or it's not exclusively an export pipeline. It'll be about 50-50. So I want you to know that put out by the Alberta Federation of Labour and other labor groups that are working in the oil industry across the country, they have absolutely directly refuted this. They say the only refinery in this area would be the Irving refinery, and the bitumen would be going to a new facility, a new terminal that they would build next to the refinery. But that will be a cracking refinery, not a coking refinery, which means that it will not be able to refine very much bitumen. Bitumen being the kind of energy that would be coming from the tar sands, without investing literally billions and billions of dollars into this facility, and there has been no such announcement. So it's very important that we not take at face value the kind of statements that the company is making on this. They've made vast majority of this crude is going to export, and the Alberta Federation of Labour calls it a rip it and ship it approach that, of course, has characterized our relationship with our resources for, you know, two centuries now. And it also puts a lie to myth number 3, and it made me very sad to see the protesters out front, because I just wanted to say to every one of them, and I tried, we're not your enemy. We are on your side. We want good jobs here too. This is not about job creation. You heard the numbers tonight. One of the things one of the women said to me outside was, we don't want our young people or our husbands and so on to go out to Alberta and work. We want them to work here, and I totally and completely understand that. But we need to know that if this pipeline is allowed to be built, it would be an increase of 40% in growth in the tar sands, which means more and more of your young people will be going to Alberta. There will be the pipeline, and there will be the trains, and there will be more bitumen being produced in the in tar sands. We're trying to stop the growth of the tar sands, and by cutting the pipeline routes, by cutting the arteries, what we call the arteries, we do start to decrease the amount of this stuff that is being produced as we can start to transition. And it's really important to remember that if we put billions, or we allow our governments to put billions of dollars of subsidies into a project like this, what it's doing is basically saying that's where the energy is going, that's where our minds are going, that's where our resources are going, that's where our future is headed, and even future governments that might never have agreed to do this will be forced into that project, and it will be sending good money after bad, or bad money after good, whatever you want to say, and the necessary resources and goodwill and work that has to go into moving us to alternatives will not happen. So it's really, and I also just want to again dispel the myth around this is going to cut the number of rail transports of energy. No, it will increase the amount of bitumen that's being produced, and we have quotes from the energy industry itself saying it's not either or, it's both. We want more of all. They can produce enough energy in the tar sands to fill Keystone XL, Northern Gateway, Energy East, which will be the mother or father, grandfather of them all, and still continue to ship by rail, and to start shipping by tanker, which is the newest concern that we have. So it's really important that we say no to the growth in the tar sands, and understand that this is not for local job creation. This is not going to do anything sustainably locally. Now on to my passion about water. This is very much a threat to our water sources across the country. Bitumen is not your grandfather's oil. It's not conventional crude. It's thick, tarry stuff. It's like cold molasses or peanut butter. And to get it to move when it has not been already refined, to get it to move through the pipelines, they have to liquefy it with liquid chemicals like benzene. Some of the worst poisons known to humankind are used to dilute this stuff. It's called diluted bitumen or dilbit, to make it pump through the pipe. And we know, and Matt spoke about this, and Ben spoke about this, that we know that this stuff, it acts differently when there is a spill. It sinks to the bottom. The terrible accident that people have talked about in Kalamazoo, Michigan, happened 4.5 years ago, was bitumen from the tar sands. You need to know that. And $1 billion later, they simply cannot get the stuff off the bottom of their water systems, and just huge numbers of people, jobs, fisheries, farms, and so on were destroyed. So if we allow this to come through our communities to threaten the Bay of Fundy, to threaten the St. Lawrence, we are putting huge areas of our water systems at risk. We did a study. We just actually basically took the route all along and took a map and then overlaid it with a map of every water system across the country. If allowed to be built, Energy East will cross over 1,000 waterways in our country. And I want, Matt talked about the Bay of Fundy. I just want to say there will be many other fresh watersheds here in New Brunswick, but also along the St. Lawrence. They're already shipping bitumen from the tar sands by tanker from this port in Kaukauna in Quebec down the St. Lawrence and across the ocean to Europe, because Stephen Harper wants to replace Canadian energy for Europe with energy from Russia. So there's a real move now, not only to ship this stuff down to refineries in the Gulf and over to China and India and Asia and so on, but now to ship it to Europe. So the possibilities are huge in terms of the increase in this stuff if we're not able to stop these arteries. And I just want to say, in the St. Lawrence, we heard about the right whales here. In the St. Lawrence, it's the belugas. And we have found out in the last few days that there are a number of mayors in the communities all along the St. Lawrence who are saying we do not want this. And if the Energy East, if they start to build it, we will just say, you shall not pass. I mean, you need to know that we're building what I call a wall of opposition to Energy East from Hardisty, Alberta to Nova Scotia, because as you heard, they're going to be impacted too. And we need to say all along the way, we cannot put our water systems at risk. This is being promoted by a federal government under Stephen Harper, and by the way, there will be hearings under the National Energy Board. The National Energy Board is not allowed to look at the climate or environmental impacts of this. You have to prove, if you're going before them, that you have a personal interest. Otherwise, you're not going to be allowed to make a statement. And no matter what they come up with, and I promise you they will say it's just fine to have this pipeline move ahead, the Harper government has reserved the right to overturn any decision they don't like. So it is basically a situation now where this government, the current government, has the right to say yes to this, no matter what we say and no matter what the Energy Board says, although they'll probably say yes. And in order to move this stuff, the Harper government has gutted the Fisheries Act, they gutted the Navigable Waters Protection Act. 99% of all our lakes and rivers now are totally unprotected from any pipeline carrying anything by federal legislation. They gutted the Environmental Assessment Act, and there were 3,000 environmental assessments that were dropped at the time that happened with the Omnibus Bill 2 years ago. A number of those were pipeline assessments, and they've taken over $100 million from programs to protect our fresh water. This is a government that's basically said, not only we're going to move away from Kyoto and abandon our climate goals and our climate commitments, but we're going to abandon our fresh water. And so what it's left to is our communities very much needing to work with First Nations, because First Nations really have the only legislation, the only legal protection left. There are no legal protections at a federal level for any of our waterways. And so it's really important that we understand this and that we reinstate these when we do say goodbye to Stephen Harper in the next election. I just want to end with two thoughts. One of them is, and if I talk about this too much, you'll have to get a shepherd's hook and get me off, because I want to just remind us that we are a planet running out of clean water. I've finished a new book, came out a few months ago, called Blue Future, Protecting Water for People and the Planet Forever. And I can tell you the recent studies, the recent information coming from everything from the World Bank to the UN, to the Pacific Institute, you name it, tells us that the lesson we learned back in grade 6, that you can't run out of water. You remember that diagram? It looked like the earth had a big river running around it. This hydrologic cycle would always work. It's not true. We are depleting, polluting, and most importantly, displacing water from where nature has put it so that it operates healthy hydrologic cycles to where we want it. That's the story in California. They've pumped this stuff mercilessly all over the state. As they say there, water moves uphill to money. And we're not leaving water, we're not protecting water, we're not restoring watersheds, which is half, by the way, half of the answer to the climate crisis. Because we know now that when you take down a rainforest, the rain goes away. We know that there's a direct link between drought and the removal of water from our watersheds. We have, get me started, we go China. Since 1990, half of the rivers in China have disappeared. They're gone. They're not just polluted, they're gone, right? There's a study on groundwater pumping around the world that said that the Great Lakes of North America, if they're being pumped as mercilessly as we're now pumping groundwater, the Great Lakes could be, and I quote, bone dry in 80 years. If you've ever stood on one of the Great Lakes, you can't even imagine how this could be. I thought, oh, that'll be on the front page of every, you know, newspaper in North America. Nope, it was stuck in a science journal and not requoted. The Ogallala Aquifer that Ben speaks so passionately about, the U.S. Department of Agriculture 2 years ago made a statement saying it'll be gone in our lifetime. We are abusing our water sources so badly, so relentlessly. And to my mind, to then allow, well, we know that we're doing this, and that all the things that we need to do, which is to create a new water ethic so that we place the concept of protecting water at the core of everything we do, every policy, every single practice, the way we grow food, the way we produce energy, the way we do trade agreements, every single thing that we do needs to ask, what's the impact on water? And if the impact on water is negative, it's got to go back to the drawing boards. I mean, this is absolutely crucial if the planet is to survive what we're doing to it. So what I want to say to you in closing tonight is that Atlantic Canada is on the precipice of an extremely important decision. And that is to put the safety of the people, your waterways, your tourism, your fisheries, your history, the future of your kids and grandkids and 7 generations on at risk by allowing a pipeline that is only going to go through your community. It's not going to bring anything to your community except potential devastation for the benefit of some wealthy oil companies in Alberta because they are dying to increase production and find a way to sell their product on foreign markets. Is that what we're going to do? Is that what we're going to allow? We talk to councillors across the country who feel it's a done deal and they say there's nothing we can do about it. That is defeatism. Of course we can say no to a pipeline that's going to put our waterways in this kind of jeopardy. Or are we going to set down the path of a future that will create more and different jobs, protect our future, and protect our waterways? The Energy East pipeline is our risk and their reward. There is no other way to look at it. And when people see the facts, including our friends who were outside tonight with the picket, I think when people really hear the argument and see the numbers in terms of the risk and jobs, they will come to the conclusion, as we have, that this is not worth the risk to us, and we should deny the reward to those who would put us at this kind of terrible risk. This is a very important moment for Atlantic Canada, and I just want to say that my father, Bill McGrath, was born and raised in Pointe-du-Chien. My mother was raised in St. John and Moncton, so I come from here. My dad went off to fight. My mom's first husband was killed in the Second World War, and then when she married my dad, when he came back from war, and he saw many hard years, they loved this province. And I know if they were alive today, because I know we used to talk about protecting the land, protecting the fisheries. My dad would be so worried about it. I know that they would say, we didn't go off to fight for, you know, this beautiful place, this beautiful province, to allow it to be used in this way. So I just want to say thank you so much. We're building a wall of opposition to Energy East and a wall of a yes. They're saying say yes to this. We've got a yes to. We have a yes to a different kind of future. We need to put our resources and talent and brains and political energy towards a sustainable alternative for our kids and their kids and their kids. Thank you so much.
I'm a landowner just down the river, and just to answer the questions, hopefully I remember these questions. One was about what kind of contact have you had with TransCanada and how do they get onto your property. Land agents have visited all people that are landowners along the proposed route and asked them to sign a survey agreement, which allows them to get TransCanada to enter your property and do environmental tests and soil samples and all of those things. We, as landowners, my husband and I, did not sign that agreement, so they have not been on our property. There has been no work yet on the easement agreements or contracts with landowners, but we feel that's coming very shortly. We are organizing, trying, and we're going door to door and asking people in New Brunswick to join our cause, and we do have a group of landowners now in southern New Brunswick that are concerned about protecting our land. And my concern is not the money factor, like Ben said. To me, it's about the value of your property. We have one chance to sign that agreement, that contract, when it comes through, if it happens. And that's an agreement that is with you for the rest of your life and the generations, with your family. We have a 4th generation farm. We haven't used chemicals in 30 years, and we have 4 children that we're thinking about their future. So I hope that answers your questions. If anybody wants to talk to me after about joining our cause and joining our group, I'd be very interested in having a chance to get your information, because that's how it starts. And I probably would like to have Miriam's phone number.